Greetings to everyone on today's first video. My name is Jimmy, and today we will have no less interesting stories. I will not detain you. Let's get started. Story 1 from user Schnozdog. Not me, but my aunt. My aunt, who was a single mother at the time and ran a daycare service in her house, lived next to a psychopath. After a bad ice storm one day, my aunt had a bunch of tree limbs fall into her backyard. Her neighbor's husband came over and cleaned it up for her. You know, just being a good neighbor. And in turn, my aunt thanked him with a case of beer. You know, just being a good neighbor. Well, his wife took that as flirting, and so began a one-sided feud against my aunt. It was a while ago, so I don't remember everything. What I remember, though, was horrifying. She tried to run over my aunt's dog once. Another time, she called Child Protective Services and told them my aunt was a bad person and working at her house during the daycare hours. Probably the worst one, though, was when my aunt found a bit of her house and grass near the house burnt. She's old high school friends with the fire inspector, so he came and confirmed a fire was started using a propellant. My aunt took her to court over these things, but I don't remember what came of it. I'm pretty sure she at least got a restraining order. Story 2 from user Omilo. My neighbors had problems. They had constant nightly blowouts and physical fights. Together, but not married. Still super on-off. Dad was an alcoholic. Cops knew them by name. Once, when we were sleeping, 2 a.m., we heard the screaming and cries of their son, my little sister's best friend. And a minute later, he's knocking on the door for my mom to help. She pulls him inside, and a few minutes later, the mom shows up, bloody and beaten up. She asks my mom to lock the door and holds her son. She wouldn't call the police out of fear they'd take the son, so my mom pulled the couch out and made them a makeshift bed, door locked, food and coffee being made, while my sister and the son slept while my mom spoke to her, and they arranged something. About an hour after they'd showed up, he starts kicking our door and screaming. The son is crying. The mom is holding him. My mom fights with him through the door for over an hour till he leaves. My mom arranged for a place for them to stay in a women's shelter an hour or so away and brought them there the next night after he thought they'd already left. She spent 2 weeks sneaking as much as she could to them, his schoolwork. Anything till she found an apartment back locally and felt safe to come back. They're still on and off, no longer physically fighting, though they both never stay at his house anymore. Story 3 from user Uber Siren. Oh, let's see, she told me my dad died of an incurable brain cancer because I didn't speak the tongue of Jesus and lay hands on him and pray. Before I knew how crazy she was, we let our son go to her house to play with her daughter, and when we came to pick him up, they were gone. Turns out she had driven them to her parents' house like 40 minutes away without our permission. Gave us a bag of hand-me-downs for our daughter with a razor blade in the bottom. There's so much. Like, how much time do you all have? Edit. Okay, here it goes, though the worst is above. It started out that we just thought she was a free spirit, hippy-dippy Scandinavian lady with alternative parenting ideas. But we gradually learned that she was just a horrible person. The first red flag was that I picked up my 4-year-old son after a short visit playing with her younger girl, and she said they were playing beach naked most of the time. I told her he wasn't allowed to be undressed anymore, but wasn't mad, because I knew things were less uptight in Norway, where she was from. Talked to my son about it. Her older daughter was always misbehaving. Her first time over to our house, she smeared chapstick all over an entire wall. She was like 6, plenty old enough to know better. Another time she sneaked into our house while I was outside playing with my kids and started eating some brownies I had just made. I mean, she tore a hole right smack in the middle of the plastic wrap over the dish and scooped out handfuls of brownie. She would pole dance on the tree out front, singing "Shake Ya Money Maker." 6 years old, maybe 7. She had birthday parties for her children, which we were invited to and brought gifts to. And then we found out their real birthdays were later in the year, when we were invited again, and tried to decline. The lady tried to explain that she celebrated half birthdays. I explained to her that I didn't. After the kidnapping incident above, my children were not allowed to play at their house anymore. We still all ran into each other walking to school. She would tell me how she saw real demons walking around disguised as people. told me that God told her that I was really close to seeing the light and becoming Christian. It was during this time that someone called CPS on her, and she accused me of it. It wasn't me, but maybe it should have been. The dad was around and surprisingly a super nice, down-to-earth guy with a good sense of humor. He was actually the one who was at home when we tried to pick up my sons and told us she had taken them. He was mortified that she hadn't cleared it with us and that we didn't know anything about it. He was black, and she was white. She made a few racist comments at one of the birthday parties that made me uncomfortable. Dead serious about how black people are always late. We finally moved, but she caught up with me one day to give me the bag used clothes for my daughter. Sliced my finger on the razor blade in the bag, luckily not very badly. That was the last I saw of her. I know there was more, but I have to put my well-adjusted kids to bed now. Story 4 from user Eslachance. I had this one downstairs neighbor that lacked any respect for the fact that our building wasn't sound insulated. He would listen to loud music mostly through the day and sometime late at night. I'm a patient person, tried to ask them to be careful, or sometime banged on the floor when I just wanted to sleep. This lasted for months, but nothing had yet been done with the landlord. One day, though, I think he discovered that he really, really loved Gnarls Barkley's Crazy, and he decided it was appropriate to play it half a dozen times in the course of an hour, and I just had it. I really blew it. So, being a karaoke jockey and having my equipment on hand, I decided to show him what loud was. I connected my speakers to my computer through my console, then I went hunting for the absolute worst karaoke cover of that same song. I remember vividly, it was this creepy fat basement dweller in his late 40s dedicating the cover to a random 14-year-old girl on the internet, and it was horribly off tune. The voice was this annoying falsetto. So I played it, with the speakers flat on the floor so he'd get the full brunt of it. I played it 3 times in a row loud enough that he would definitely suffer the consequence of his lack of respect. And, wouldn't you know it, he never played that song again, and he started being much more conservative in his volume levels. He left that summer and I never heard Crazy again from his collection. I wonder why. Story 5 from user Obia. My first apartment had a creepy old man who lived on the basement floor, and this equally creepy kid in his early 30s on the top floor. Both of them regularly sat out on the porch entrance at varying times of the day and would catch me whenever I came home. I lied to the old man, we'll call him George, about my name in a moment of panic, and when he found out that wasn't my name, he started getting more aggressive in greeting me with my real name to show me how I'd done him wrong. He would circle the building when he realized I'd started using the back exit and sit on the back steps. I told my landlord twice, and all they did was tell him not to talk to me, which made matters worse because he was still doing everything he was previously, but with a vengeance. He ended up stealing the wreath off my door because nobody else had one on their door and threw it in the trash. At this point, I no longer cared about causing my landlord grief and asked them to pull up video footage. Turns out he'd been coming upstairs several times to see when I left for work and would stand in front of my door. He ended up getting evicted. This was all happening while the kid on the top floor was still there. He was weird, but I didn't pay him much mind. After the whole George thing, I wanted to be on good terms with the other tenants, so I started saying hello when I came through the entrance or in the hallways. Bad call. Such a bad call. He started going around telling the other dudes that lived upstairs that he could that girl Objaw down in C5555 and how I wouldn't waste time jumping his bones. Whatever, I stopped saying hi to him. About 2 days later, I went to take my trash out and passed my window that was facing the alleyway. This dude was pressed up against my window, sliding his face around the glass trying to see me. He saw me and tried to play it off, but the situation was already for him. Called the cops. Turns out he'd been pegged for peeping for censored gratification before on 2 other charges. He was evicted. Story 6 from user MissQueen42. I was in a car accident when I was young, maybe 8 years old. I had my 2 sisters, one younger, one older, in the back seat with me, and in the front were our babysitters who were our very close family friends. We went off a curb on our very own road that was notorious for accidents. My brother would total his car slamming into a telephone pole in the same corner a few years later. Anywho, we slid off and the car flipped several times. It was the middle of winter in northern Vermont. We had tons of snow and it was mad cold out. We were all okay as it was a low-speed accident, but the Jetta doors had crunched in, and the only way we could try to get out was by kicking the cracked-to-trash windshield out. While our babysitters did their best, we couldn't get out. By his time, the person whose lawn we had rolled onto came down. He was very nice, but couldn't get to us either. He told us he would go get his parents, who lived just up the road, to help. He returns with his parents. My babysitters' faces are a mixture of disbelief and concern. Context here would be, my babysitters are black. This guy's parents were their next-door neighbors who were extremely racist. They would shoot in the air and at the general direction of the family's home and shout about America on basically every even remotely patriotic holiday. It came to a head one year when the shot through 2 layers of the fence our babysitter's father had installed out of worry for his many kids. And us, because we basically lived there, on 4th of July and were finally warned by the local police. Now, while analyzing our situation, the faces on the parents of the guy were a mixture of disgust and amusement. To this day, I'll remember, "We aren't lifting a damn finger for these N-word." And they turned chuckling to themselves and left. The guy was embarrassed and apologized on behalf of his parents. A few minutes later, a fire truck arrives because nothing ever happens, so why not? And they break open the doors and help us out. I was freezing and confused, as were my sisters. That act of racism has always stuck with me as totally abominable. I sincerely hope those 2 assholes met a crappy end. Story 7 from user Apolloroth. In university, my best friend and I rented a walkout basement suite of a house with a young family upstairs with a couple's kids around 3 and 5. When we initially moved in, we went to introduce ourselves and tackle all concerns up front, like you do. And the wife answered by just barely peeking out the door, saying no more than 3 words to us, then closing the door on us mid-sentence. Fast forward a couple weeks in. We started to have a few people over for board games and a few beers. Laid the ground rules for everyone to be out around 10:30. We hear a knock on the connecting door, and it's the mom saying we're too loud as they are trying to put kids to bed. Fair. Quiet everyone up and head out to a cafe. The next morning at literally 5 a.m., bam! Right above my room it sounded like goddamn dwarf blacksmiths slamming sledgehammers on the floor, shaking the house. Figured I'd cut some slack cause of last night. Maybe an early morning of IKEA furniture. Perhaps a one-time thing. Get on my bike and head to school. The next morning, bam! 5 a.m. again. Dropping bowling balls. Only this time he stopped and came directly around to both of our bedroom windows and just stared through them for what seemed like an hour. I had to get to class, hop on my bike, and head out. That evening I went and knocked myself, wife answers, refuses to let me speak with her husband, and then slams the door again. Frustrating, I call and let the landlord know what's going on. He says he'll speak to them. Okay, hope that works. Next morning, again, 5 a.m., bam, bam. Thinking, what the hell is this? The Flintstones family upstairs? Again, his smug face right after walking up and staring through our window. Keep in mind, I've still never met or talked to this guy. I get up and try to go outside to speak with him, and he hurries back upstairs inside. Now it gets better. This went on for about a week, and every time I tried to approach them, they ran away and locked their doors. Finally, one night I was like it. Had some people over to pre-drink on a Friday, and we were a little loud because who cares at that point, right? Left for the pub around 9:30 p.m. and went out for a solid time. Next morning, I went to grab my bike to head out to a soccer game. It's gone. From a locked storage room both units shared. Storage is still locked. I thought maybe I misplaced it while drunk. Could happen. Nope. Found out later that, earlier that morning, he stole my $2,000 downhill mountain bike and sold it at a pawn shop. We promptly moved out not even a month into living there. Thanks to everyone who watched to the end. See you in the next video. Bye-bye.